Hi! In previous videos looking at the vehicles of the Rogue Trader years of Warhammer 40,000, I have looked at the official kits produced by Games Workshop during that time, such as the Lan Raider and the Battle Wagon that you can see here, and also at the variations that were converted from these official kits, such as this Spartan Assault vehicle and also this Orc Gob Smasher. Now, there was also a third set of vehicles for which rules were produced, and so you could field them in your armies, but no models were ever produced, and they were not simply converted from existing kits. If you wanted to field them, you had to scratch build them entirely yourself. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at this final set of vehicles. I'm going to start by looking at what is perhaps one of the most infamous of the Rogue Trader vintage scratch-built vehicles, and this is the Imperial Gravitattac, or as it's sometimes known, the infamous deodorant tank. And that is because the hull of this vehicle was originally made from a roll-on deodorant stick container. However, deodorant sticks of that sort of shape are impossible to come by now. I spent a lot of time looking. So this particular example has instead been constructed using quite a bit of plastic pipe and plasticard. It is then detailed with a few pieces taken from Zoid toys, although in this case these are metal cast. I found somebody who was casting the parts online and bought a few sets to produce this example of the Gravitattac. Now, the instructions for making this were originally published in White Dwarf magazine, later republished in the Warhammer 40,000 compendium. But this is not the only Gravitattac from the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader years, because in the Book of the Astronomicon, chapter approved, there was another Gravitattac which had the same overall profile but a different weapons fit. So, I have produced a second vehicle with the same design of hull, but I have instead armed it with a multi-laser in the turret and a pair of bolters here. The multi-laser again comes from a Zoid toy, and the bolters come from the RTB-01 set. But there is a third version of the Gravitattac, because also in chapter approved it was mentioned that this vehicle was reverse engineered by the Imperium from an Eldar design, and the Eldar design is referred to as being significantly more streamlined. So I have produced this. This is the Gravitattac as it appeared in the Eldar army list in that publication, and for this I've actually used a shampoo bottle because it was more streamlined than the plastic pipe, and the engine pods are instead bits from a pen. They had the lids of a pen. I've still used a spoon for the turret, and then a gun from an old vintage toy. I can't remember the exact toy, and the shuriken catapults in the turret here are just scratch built. The same issue of White Dwarf that gave instructions for building the Imperial Gravitattac vehicle also gave instructions on how to build this vehicle here, and this is the Groundhog, and this is a crawler, a tunnelling vehicle. And this is a light vehicle designed to carry 2 crewmen, and is just armed with a pair of bolters, and it will move underground to emerge onto the battlefield wherever you want it. Now, crawlers were featured in the Rogue Trader rulebook itself, and there was an example profile given called the Sand Crawler. And that had the same profile as the Groundhog. The only difference between the two vehicles was the armament. The Groundhog has 2 bolt guns, whereas the Sandcrawler has 2 auto guns. But the description given of the Sandcrawler really made it sound like this model here. Crushers that will provide motive power as well, a large heat shield at the front with a forward section for dragging material in, and then a tail at the back. So I decided that really they would look the same. The weapons are sufficiently recessed that there'd be no difference in detail. So I haven't built a second vehicle to represent the Sandcrawler. This Groundhog would represent it equally as well. Instructions for making this scratch-built version of the Orc Gob Smasher, which is simply scaled up from the epic scale model that was available at the time, appeared in the Modelling Workshop series of articles in White Dwarf. And interestingly, this wasn't the first Gob Smasher design that had been detailed for Warhammer 40,000, because when the plastic battle wagon kit was released, the same Modelling Workshop articles released instructions on how to convert this version from the plastic kit, again producing a Gob Smasher, although one that looked radically different from the epic scale model. So with the option of a converted model or this scratch-built one, you had the choice of which design you wanted to field in an Orc army. And it's here I'm going to make some honourable mentions, because the same issue of White Dwarf that showed you how to make the scratch-built Gob Smasher also included some basic templates and instructions, though no rules, for 4 other battle wagon types. You had, going from left to right as you see them here, the Lung Burster, the Bone Breaker, the Bone Crusher, and the Brain Crusher. Each of these was just presented as some simple templates, although I have not used those templates to make these models. If you've seen previous vehicles, you'll know I scaled these up from the epic scale equivalent. But instructions were presented for making this class of vehicles, so I'm going to show them here, even if there were no actual rules for using them in Warhammer 40,000 at the time. Perhaps the simplest of all the instructions given for self-built vehicles during the Rogue Trader years of Warhammer 40,000 was the Genestealer Cult Limousine. And in the issue of White Dwarf that featured the cultist army list, the official advice given was just to use a 1:43 die-cast model car. And that's exactly what I've done here. I've just repainted a model car, although I have added a couple of Orc bolters to the front of it to represent weapons generated for the Genestealer army being affixed to their vehicle. Rather more complicated than just repainting a toy car is this scratch-built Baneblade, and instructions for making this out of rather a lot of plastic card, and also significant number of parts taken from the contemporary multi-part plastic Predator kit were presented in White Dwarf as part of its Modelling Workshop range of articles, and these instructions were also accompanied by full rules for including it as part of your army in Warhammer 40,000. The main Rogue Trader rulebook itself gave rules for vehicles divided up into different categories depending on how they operated, and it provided profiles mainly for a small, medium and large generic vehicle, and also a specific example for each category, the only exception to that being drop pods. There were no specific examples of drop pods given. Some of the vehicles given as specific examples were produced as actual models, but these were the lighter vehicles, and the heavier vehicles, or larger ones, you had to build yourself. The example given for flyers in the Rogue Trade rulebook was this model here, the Ogreous Flyer. I believe the name comes from the name of the model kit that was used as the source for a number of the parts, while the main fuselage was made from the top of a bottle of some sort of cleaner from the looks of things. However, I've not been able to find a bottle of the right shape, and I don't know if the model kit is still in production. If it is, it's probably very expensive. So this particular example here is entirely scratch built. I used plastic card and bits of a glue stick container for the fuselage, and then more plastic card to build the wings and the legs. The legs had a very insectoid look. Some people say they might come from a Zoid toy. I originally looked at a Mantazoid to see if the legs resembled it, but they're quite different. So again, I've scratch built this out of plastic card, and I've used an RTB-01 Space Marine for the pilot, and the main las cannon under here is just taken from a Zoid toy. The example walker in the Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader rulebook was the Stega tank, and this is a battlefield walker equipped with a pair of las cannons. There were no clear illustrations of it at all, and from the basic description I initially thought it was perhaps converted from a model of a Star Wars AT-ST. Part of the reason there were so few photographs of vehicles in the Rogue Trader rulebook is because those that had been scratch built by the designers were too readily identifiable as vehicles from other intellectual properties, and Games Workshop didn't want to be sued. However, there was a rough illustration of numerous walkers advancing, and they had a very elongated hull, just like this model has here. And so that got me thinking that maybe Stega tanks weren't AT-STs. And instead, I found a different Star Wars toy. I looked at their mini rig range from the action figures produced by Kenner. And this is a rather heavily converted Cap 2 Captivator with its cockpit removed, the sucker feet replaced by spoons, the grabbing claw on the back replaced by exhaust pipes, and the two claw arms replaced by scratch-built las cannons. Regular viewers of my videos may already be familiar with this particular model here, because this is the original design of Lan Raider as it was presented in the Warhammer 40,000 rulebook before the official kit changed the design quite significantly, and with no kit produced of this exact vehicle, you had to scratch build it entirely based on the photographs included in the rulebook. The main rulebook also included rules for civilian vehicles, called road wheelers at the time, and this example is the city car, which had a capacity of 10 people, so I've made this quite a large model. If I actually just bring in the Gene Stealer Cult Limousine, you can see how big it is. And all of the background information for the various armies said that these sorts of vehicles weren't used by the militaries. So instead, they were probably meant for scenarios set on hive worlds with battles between various gangs, or perhaps inquisitors hunting down various miscreants. And this particular model is just entirely scratch built. It's similar to a sketch that was provided in the main rule book, although you could just use die-cast cars to represent those vehicles, as was done with the Cult Limousine later on. The final vehicle I'm going to be presenting to you here today is the original Super Heavy for Warhammer 40,000. And these are vehicles which put Bane Blades and Shadow Swords to shame, because they were so huge that the official advice was they would actually be your battlefield. You would map out the interior of the vehicle, and you would use the top of it as your game board, and your game would consist of one side invading the vehicle controlled by the other. However, rules were still given for fielding these as models, and since you didn't come here to see plans, you came to see models, I have scratch built this Imperial Juggernaut. Now, interestingly, the description of the Imperial Juggernaut suggests that it is one of the larger vehicles because it can house up to 3 standard large vehicles inside it, whereas the profile given is for a much smaller one with only a capacity of 100 troops and a mere 140 wound points instead of the 300 that the largest vehicles would have. So I've actually chosen to build this as one of the smaller juggernauts at a mere 2 feet long. I just bring in a Bane blade. You can see the difference in scale there. So obviously these vehicles were not common in the game, but if you were crazy enough to try using them, the rules were presented for it. So here we now have my traditional group shot towards the end of the video of all the models I've looked at today, representing the vehicles that you would have to scratch build to use them in Rogue Trader vintage games of Warhammer 40,000, including, of course, our 4 honourable mention Orc battle wagons and the original Super Heavy that is so large it makes the shot a bit too big for my background. But I'm not quite finished yet because there's one more thing I want to add. And here it is. This is every single vehicle from the Rogue Trader edition of Warhammer 40,000. Official kits, conversions and scratch built models, including our honourable mentions of our Orc battle wagons, for which templates were provided but no rules, and also Sleazy Rider and Judge Dredd, who may not have been part of the official Warhammer 40,000 range but could easily have been used within the game. So whether it walked, rolled, hovered or flew, these are the vehicles of Rogue Trader. Thanks for watching. Bye.